and welcome back to the WordPress Edge podcast, the ultimate destination for professionals looking to harness the power of WordPress for large-scale enterprise solutions. I'm your host, Landon DePasquale. I'm an enterprise web strategist here at AmericanEagle.com. Today, we'll be going to the edge with enterprise-level scaling on WordPress. I'm happy to be joined by Michael Khalili. He's the Director of Product Marketing over at WordPress VIP. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself for the viewers who don't know you. What do you do at VIP? What's your background?
Sure. So I work in the marketing organization at WordPress VIP, really at the intersection of product and marketing, which in a lot of ways is what a lot of the customers of WordPress VIP do. So I run a small team of product marketers here. I have spent the last almost 20 years in the tech industry, big companies that you've probably heard of, small startups that you probably haven't heard of, and one or two good hits that you have. I've been at WordPress VIP for about 2.5 years now, really building out this function and working with a lot of our customers and talking to a lot of our customers on their challenges and how we can solve them.
Fantastic. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. Before we dive into the questions and discussion of enterprise-level scaling on WordPress, for any of our listeners who don't know who WordPress VIP is, why don't you really quickly tell us a little bit about VIP?
Sure. So WordPress VIP is part of the Automatic family of companies, founded by Matt Mullenweg, one of the founders of the WordPress project. And our mandate is basically to take WordPress from where it is up towards the enterprise. And we started very much with a lot of large media companies that were trying to publish at scale. And then we started winning some more sort of corporate customers and folks that were really building up their content marketing practices. And now, we have government customers and major agencies and the people with the highest security requirements running on WordPress VIP. And our platform is just rock solid for them. And so that's kind of what we've been doing and where we continue to go.
Awesome. Fantastic. So you mentioned the word scale in your description. For those who are listening and maybe aren't familiar with the term scaling or scalability, especially in a WordPress context, what does it mean when we talk about scaling or scalability, especially when it comes to enterprise WordPress?
That really is kind of the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I'd say there's a few different definitions. Now, 9 times out of 10, when someone talks to me about scaling, it's about handling the growth of their business, handling spikes in their business, being able to make sure that their site is 100% reliable, performs really well, that day that they get 10 times, 20 times, 100 times more traffic than is normal. And so that is one definition of scaling, and it's something that I think a lot of people think about. But that's just one definition of scaling. There's a few others that I would put out there, and one of those is, how do I support a growing team of sort of marketers or practitioners building content on the platform? And in a lot of ways, that's one of the places where WordPress shines just inherently. Because if you have huge teams of folks, the ease of use and the sort of flexibility of WordPress, the need or the lack of need to train all those people up, that really helps you grow the team out and sort of scale your team. There's another piece, which is as you scale the team, as you scale your site, you end up with more pages, more content, more stuff. And that creates a new set of challenges as the number of pieces of content that you're creating for sort of different segments or different customer journeys grows out. Now you've got to be able to manage all that. And it actually causes some technical challenges as well that we've thought about and worked through. And then the last piece is just scaling number of digital properties. A lot of our customers have a bunch of different ways that they interact with their customers, with different brands, with different sort of experiences. And how do you scale that out? So scaling the site itself from a technical standpoint, but then also scaling your own team, scaling the amount of stuff that you're producing, and then scaling the number of experiences that you build.
That's fascinating. And my perception is that there are certain things that WordPress is inherently better at or worse that than others when it comes to those items. So if you were to take one of those out of the list, what do you think WordPress is the best at when it comes to that sort of scaling? And which one do you think WordPress struggles with the most?
So WordPress solves a bunch of those challenges and sometimes, I don't want to say creates other challenges, but certainly is susceptible to other challenges. When I think about building up a wider team and really making everyone productive, like core WordPress does that better than
Yeah.
anything else in the industry. I think that is one area, that people come to WordPress and people expect WordPress to do well on. But the flip side of that, WordPress was built for kind of that consumer type usability
Yeah.
that should be just as easy, just as intuitive as the kind of things that you use in your everyday life. But it wasn't always designed for sort of the biggest enterprises. And there's certain ways that you have to start architecting your WordPress instance, you know, in order to handle those other challenges around spikes and traffic and things like that.
Yep.
A lot of people try to do it with containerization. That's how we've solved the problem. Is that we sort of containerize different pieces of WordPress, um, and that's not necessarily trivial to do with WordPress. It can be done, but it requires actual technical know-how, and it requires you to do some work. The other thing that is kind of a double-edged sword when it comes to WordPress is its ecosystem. One of the great things about WordPress is that it is so flexible. You can use a bajillion plugins that are out there,
Yeah.
but for any technology, this isn't true just for WordPress. I would say this is true for every piece of technology. Your tech stack is only as good as its weakest link. And so you have to, if you have 100 things that are working with WordPress, the weakest of those 100 is the point where things uh, break down.
Yeah.
And like one of the things that we work with our customers really closely on is figuring out which ones are great for their use case, great for their scale, great for their particular situation, which ones maybe they should avoid. It might be great for the small mom and pops, but doesn't really work at enterprise scale. So WordPress solves some of those challenges, but WordPress also creates some things you got to think about.
Interesting. Uh, I think the plugin one is a fascinating one because you're right. It is really that can really help you out, or it can absolutely destroy your site. And it really is being thoughtful and careful about the plugins that you pull into your build. Because I think every WordPress site uses some number of industry standard plugins. VIP has their own kind of list of fantastic plugins that everyone suggests using, but there are definitely some potential pitfalls around that methodology as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is the double-edged sword of having a massive community, and any technology with wide adoption has this sort of
Yep.
concern or thing that you have to think through. And it's achievable. Don't get me wrong. Like, none of that is insurmountable.
Sure.
Uh, Making the right choices there uh, can be the difference between a very smooth walk and, frankly, a bunch of engineering effort that you'd rather not have had to go down.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know we talked about these kind of four items. We talked about scalability around traffic, around the team, around content, and then around digital properties. We've talked about those
Mhm.
areas where WordPress shines and maybe those areas where WordPress has a slightly larger challenge. Are there any unique challenges that WordPress faces that maybe other platforms don't? The one we just talked about is one that's common to a lot of platforms, but what are some of those unique areas that is specific to WordPress?
I think one which I kind of touched on before is uh, planning for growth and planning for dynamically growing. And that's where I got into the issue around containerization. Is like a lot of people either have to over provision or they run into potential issues. There are technical solves for that, particularly around sort of containerizing the services within WordPress. But WordPress predates a lot of that technology,
Yeah.
and there is definitely work that has to be done. And frankly, it took us a while to get it completely right. It isn't trivial. Some of our best engineers spent a long time making sure that that operated well. If you're a relatively small shop, or a company that's going through growth and you're planning for the future, like that can be a pretty substantial resource challenge.
So that brings up a really interesting question. Uh, why does scalability matter for the vast majority of enterprise users? Even a lot of enterprise sites are not that big, right? Or they don't start off at a size where scalability matters. So, why would an enterprise level organization care about scalability right out of the gate if they're not hitting those problems now? Why not wait 2 or 3 years until they run into those issues to solve them?
It's the old story that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I think every organization wants to be growing. Every organization has growth plans. And if you're reacting down the line, um, you're kind of behind the eight ball. You're in a situation where you're doing fire drills after the fact. You're in a situation where, the good stuff that happened, you know, your your business grew. Something about your business grew viral, or it kind of went viral, and people started paying attention to it. Now that's a bad day for you. Uh, that's horrible for
Yeah.
that to be a bad day for you. For when the best thing that could happen to you and to your business is is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Like that's why you want to plan in advance. Is you definitely have the aspiration to get there. You want to make sure that when you get there, you're ready for it, and not that you're firefighting and try and figure out how to react to it. Nobody wants to be the Coinbase bouncing QR code that everyone talked about after the Super Bowl, and everyone talked about when you clicked, or when you scanned the QR code, how the website it went to was down.
Yeah.
Like that's not the situation you want to be.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's probably fair to say that when we think about scaling and scalability on any sort of enterprise site, WordPress or otherwise, scaling
Mhm.
needs to be considered from the outset. It's not really something you get to bolt on later, right? It's not just something that once you hit that point, you can just slap on and go, oh, here's some scalability, and then you're good to go.
You sort of can, but it's going to be a painful experience. So, like, we've worked with customers that said, we never anticipated that we were going to grow at this rate. How do we retrofit what we've got uh, to operate at a higher scale? And it often involves, well, you need to change out bits of the infrastructure. You need to change out some of those plugins. You need to rewrite code. Like, it becomes a it becomes an ordeal, and it's an ordeal that's happening in a race against the clock. You know, we if you're having that problem, like we have worked with customers to do it, but you're in a mitigation exercise. You're not in a planning exercise.
And at some point, you run into that issue of, is it really still the same site you built 3 years
No, it's
ago because
it
you've swapped out so many
it,
pieces?
it ends up being a bit of a Frankenstein of you're swapping out each part little by little, while trying to hope that the whole doesn't die.
Yeah. So I think it sounds to me, if I'm hearing what you're saying right, is scalability needs to be considered from the very outset of what you're building. And for WordPress,
Yeah,
that's incredibly important in how you architect and how you set up that framework, and all sorts of choices that you make at the beginning are going to have a really large impact or a really large consequence as you move your way down that kind of journey with your digital property.
that's absolutely correct.
So I know there are different ways of approaching scalability. You've talked a little bit about VIPs, but maybe you could give us a kind of a succinct overview. What is VIP's approach to scalability?
So we've basically everywhere we could, we've containerized each part of the environment. So whether that is the core WordPress application, or for people who are doing headless applications, things like Node.js, et cetera, et cetera, what that allows us to do is auto scale sort of the infrastructure underneath it on demand. So that viral moment happens, we can automatically bring up more containers and sort of scale up the the overall resources as needed. It's sort of a horizontal scaling approach that we take. The other thing is that the little things sometimes matter. Take a little thing like search. Search is something that often breaks down on a site either as the traffic grows, as the content library grows, as the number of digital properties grows, any of those scaling things. And so, like we've architected our system to intercept database queries and send them off to a separate service, our enterprise search service, which then can scale on its own. So it doesn't impact the core application. So it's those little details architecturally that we've thought through on top of the very core architecture of how you set up, a WordPress environment.
Got it. Um, you've mentioned the importance as far as like uptime and not going down or not making that best day of your organization's existence also the worst day of its existence. What sort of value or ROI have you seen related to scaling? So not just on the negative side, but on the positive side, like what have you seen on that?
It's a difficult one to quantify. And I mean that even for the professionals out there. So we actually commissioned Forrester Research to do a ROI study for WordPress VIP, and they came up with the number that it was like a 415% ROI. That it was massive ROI. But if you actually read, they don't quantify the scalability elements
Got it.
because even the professionals, and this was the person I worked with on this was a MIT trained economist, and she couldn't quantify what it means. A lot of what scalability is trying to find an ROI on scalability is measuring what didn't happen. We had a Super Bowl commercial. I think it was actually it may have been the exact same Super Bowl as that Coinbase one. And one of our clients did a commercial, big by celebrity endorser, that sort of thing, and everything went fine. And it meant a bunch of incremental sales and it meant ROI on the Super Bowl ad they bought. Uh, you can kind of quantify what would have happened if that money had all been wasted, but it wasn't just scalability on its own.
Yeah.
Same thing. Some of our media customers. The British monarch passed away. That wasn't something you forecasted. Weren't kind of knew it was going to happen eventually, but nobody knew the day that was going to happen. All of our customers were fine, and that's a situation where a media customer is directly getting revenue from all those eyeballs that are coming to their site, and had one media property in the UK gone down, people would have just moved on to the next one and read what happened,
Yeah.
and all that revenue would have been lost. So in a lot of ways, it's hard to quantify because it's hard to quantify the thing that didn't happen.
Sure.
And that's what scalability is making sure that that the thing that didn't happen.
Yeah. It's the classic, the person that forestalls some great disaster. His name never goes down to history because you never knew that that
Mhm.
disaster was going to happen to begin with. Right.
Exactly.
So tell us a little bit of some examples of customers that you've seen that have been able to do well at that scaling level on WordPress.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few that just jump to mind. Some of which I can name by name, and some of which I'm going to have to uh, tap dance around their
Sure.
name. But one good example is 538. The site really focused on analyzing polling data and elections and things like that. You know, election night 2020, I think all of us were on their site, refreshing, trying to get the latest, and of course, it ended up being more like election week and not election night. Um, they had billions and billions and billions of requests, over that course of the evening. Flawless. Response time stayed super low. If anyone remembers it, but no issues with it. We have another customer of ours. It's a company that's sort of a software company. They manage properties for golf courses. They manage, I think, 3,000 or 5,000 golf courses, basically in a single multi-site, and basically have built a chunk of their business around scaling that up and being able to support a wide number of customers. Going back to the 2020 political arena, the Democratic National Committee, they were a customer of ours. They had to shift from having what was supposed to be a physical convention in, I believe, Milwaukee. It ended up being completely virtual. Everything was an online experience, and they hadn't initially thought that that's the way it was going to go. None of us knew how 2020 was going to go. It was an interesting year, but they were able to get their message out there. And then we talked a little bit about some of our customers that have had Super Bowl commercials and have had to scale up for that big event. But it's even smaller companies. One of my favorites is we have a customer in the UK, City AM. It's basically hyper local paper for the city of London. And if you know London, the city is not the metropolis, it's not the metropolis of London. It's a small, basically the financial district of London. And it just so happened that they had a reporter on the ground again in 2020 in South Africa. They got the earliest scoop on the Omicron variant, and it had this massive spike that they had not anticipated. They had no idea that their reporter in Johannesburg or Cape Town was going to get this exclusive story that everyone wanted to read. Handled it, flawlessly. Said it was, I think, 3 or 4 times their biggest day up to that point, and no problems whatsoever. And they were able to capitalize on that. So those are just a few examples off the top of my head.
Fantastic. Where I'd like to finish off is for a company that wants to tackle scaling or wants to think about this. What's a good place to start? How do you get down this path?
There's a few things that you have to think about. The first is what sort of capacity do you think you need? Then double it, maybe triple it. So prepare for the worst and think about capacity. And hey, if you're not going with us, you're not going with the auto scaling solution, just make sure you've built out your infrastructure to be able to handle that. The second piece is resources versus cost. When you do that, you're going to have basically extra costs every day between now and that big event. Are you willing to bear that? I think for most customers, it's worth it. But you gotta go through with the bean counters and decide whether that's whether that's going to pay off. Take a look at your current hosting solution. Are they going to be able to handle that when those moments happen? And then the last piece, stress test and figure out where the bottlenecks are. Plan for it, test it in advance, see what's going to happen. If you're making calculated decisions of I'm going to accept that the site is going to get slower in these moments, know what decisions you've made, stress test the heck out of it, and know, okay, here are the ones that here are the bottlenecks we can kind of clear away, and here are the ones that we're just going to live with, and that's where I would start if I was a customer thinking about that.
Fantastic. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
No, I appreciate you having me today. I know scalability is one of the challenges that a lot of organizations think about, particularly with WordPress. Scalability and security are probably the two that come up most often. So I hope that I've imparted some thoughts about how you can improve in those areas and how you can plan for the future.
Fantastic. Michael, thank you for joining us, and I'm sure we'll have you back very soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks again for joining us at The Edge. I am your host, Landon DiPasquale. And until the next episode, push Enterprise WordPress. For more information about today's episode and the topics discussed today, check out our dedicated WordPress Edge landing page at AmericanEagle.com/studios.